everybody, thanks for joining me here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and today's session is all about creative flower photography. Whether you're in a studio or a natural setting, flower photography can be pretty challenging and definitely rewarding if you have the time and right tools to play around with your imagery. Today we're going to be talking about composition, lighting, a couple capturing techniques, depth of field, but the majority of the session is going to be discussing how Topaz software can help take your flower images to the next level, especially pushing them in a more creative direction versus a more basic editing workflow. We'll do a couple more basic edits to start off with, and then we'll get into some more creative edits as well. Let me show you a few before and afters first, just so you can kind of see the images that we're going to be taking a look at here today. This is an image, an after image. One of the issues that I find myself in, especially when I'm shooting outdoors, not in a studio setting, is making sure I'm in the right type of light. And there, more times than not, I am not in the perfect lighting that I would prefer. So especially when it comes to flower photography, you can really take advantage of the type of light that you find yourself in. And I always suggest, even if you're in really bright light, overhead light, position yourself in an area where it really helps the best for your subject. And so for this particular image, I did a really heavy backlighting to try to get this glow. Let me show you this original image. All right, so here's the original image, and you can see it has a lot of shadow area, and when I pulled it up, let's see if I can actually show you the very original here. This was the very original. I was shooting from kind of bending in all sorts of weird angles, and this is what the actual out of camera shot was. And when I was looking at that, I thought, number one, I want to rotate my canvas, so I ended up rotating my canvas several ways till I figured out which way I wanted it. And then I thought, what is the real kind of star of this image? It's not even the flowers, it's more of that glow that I was really trying to take advantage of. So I went through an editing workflow that really tried to highlight that glow. First, I took it into Topaz Lens Effects to blur out some of the background and really bring attention to these front two flowers and the glow itself. And then I took it into Topaz Black and White Effects because I thought, let's take it in and just focus in on the light and form and take out some of the color. But then when I was in Black and White Effects, I thought, this really was looking quite nice with the color, so I brought back quite a bit of that color, but still was able to really highlight those that glow and light around it. And then at this point, I decided I wanted to crop my image just a little, so I cropped out this right side, which had nothing really to offer me, the right and top. Just a quick crop there. Then I took it back into Topaz Lens Effects to really get a more creative edit and bring even more attention to the light itself. And at first I used, I was just going to go in and do a vignette, but I ended up using a toy camera preset. And so we'll go over this workflow here in just a second. Lastly, I did an opacity change for an overall before and after. Couple other edits here really quickly just to show you. This was more of a, let me get this top one off though. This one was more of a classic or basic editing workflow. There's certain programs in our product lineup that really just stand out when it comes to flower photography. And those are going to be, for me at least, Clarity, Topaz Detail, and Lens Effects. For this particular one, the only two I used were Lens Effects and Clarity. Let me show you this before. Here's the before image. I took in a Topaz Clarity just to really get a lot of natural contrast enhancement in the different areas of contrast in my image. I also worked with the Hsl adjustment in there to bring out specific color ranges for the saturation and luminosity. And then I took it into Lens Effects to work with blurring the background a little bit more using a very simple bokeh effect. And I did a bit of a color enhancement as well within Lens Effects to end up with this image. So those three programs, Clarity, Detail, and Lens Effects, seem to be pretty inherent in my editing workflow for flower imagery. we're going to go over a lot of other programs as well, including hopping into Clean really quickly. Let me go ahead and show you this image. Again, with this last layer that I used, which was Topaz Clean. And Clean will start to give you an almost cartoon-like effect, and using a couple of the different presets that we have in Topaz Clean can really give you some interesting looks, especially when it comes to flower and foliage type of photography. I really love the curly preset effect, or curly smooth preset effect, and that's what this one is. Here's before and after. Just really kind of gives you that cartoon vector like. And even if you scroll out, you don't necessarily see that, but it just feels really smooth and sharp. It's quite nice. Let's see here. This is another image that I used, except this time I used the black and white effects. This was a different uh, composition that I started off with for similar, I think it was the same flower actually. I went into black and white effects just to try to really highlight the light itself, and then went into lens effects and added in more of a pearlesque, I guess you could say, a veil-like type of light with a vignette versus getting a really dark vignette, which is pretty standard. So I went with a little bit of a lighter vignette to really bring attention to the light here. Let's look at one more here. Oh, this is a nice one. Here's before. This is the original image, and this is also dealing with not really the most ideal lighting. This was direct sunlight, I'd say at about 2 p.m., 3 p.m. maybe, and during the summer that's pretty high up in the sky still, so out of camera, it was some pretty strong light, strong contrast, but I really tried to take advantage of some of the techniques that we talked about last Thursday, which was getting low to the ground and really making the flowers themselves become larger than life and less looking down on the flowers and really becoming a part of the scene. So that's what I tried to work with here, and I really opened up my aperture to get a very shallow depth of field, and I placed certain types or certain flowers directly in front of my lens to start getting these kind of splotches of color and get a little bit more of an abstract feel to the overall look, kind of an ethereal thing. But it kind of got completely blown out of the look just didn't work for me with this really strong saturated colors and light. So first thing I did was take this into Topaz Adjust and add a very muted tone and color palette to it. And I thought that really started to take it in the direction of what I was trying to achieve without, actually did it quite easily. I used a film preset, so we'll go over this one too. Then I took it into Topaz Detail, and Topaz Detail just gave me a little bit more sharpness in certain areas. So for example, this flower over here, after detail, just cleaned everything up, sharpened everything up, let my eyes go directly to the focal plane I wanted it to. And then after that, I decided I would go into lens effects to add a little bit of a vignette. But when I went in there, I realized, and I love this new technique, I'll show it to you guys. Lens effects allows us to add a colored vignette, and if you place it correctly within your image, you can get some really cool effects, and it actually starts to help that whole ethereal effect that you're looking through some sort of haziness or color splotch. So you can get some really cool abstract effects as well. So I added a pink border or vignette just to the lower edge and to the left edge. You can see it a little bit on the right, top right edge of the image. Let me show you that one more time. Here's before and after. And I think that just completed this whole effect for me. So let's go ahead and hop on into the more basic edit real quick, and then we'll get into some of the more creative programs as well. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and just make a background copy here and go into Topaz Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Clarity. Now this is a more ideal light, at least for me in the situation I was in. I was in a very sunny day, and I was shooting at the Arboretum here in Dallas, and there is an area that the little rose garden area, and in that area there's some covered areas, some pergolas, or I forget what they're called, vines basically hanging down these wooden structures. So I was able to go in there and get a little bit more of a muted light, still some shadows going on, but they're much softer, and they really allowed for me to capture the delicacy of the flower versus the strong bright lighting. So that's really the ideal type of light if you want to have the most possibilities, I guess you can say, as far as your exposure and really working with the subject itself. You don't have to sit there and worry about the light so much when it's an overcast day, because you just can make these really beautiful exposures quite simply. So the out of camera worked for me pretty well, but it also was a bit flat, which is fantastic when you're working from your raw file or your original file. So I just wanted to give it a little bit of an extra pop and really have certain elements stand out. Specifically, I really want the interior of the flower to just definitely pop out and get a bit more contrasty against the white of the petals themselves. I also wanted to get a little bit more depth to the greenery here in the background and a little bit more glow to the bouquet effects that were going on in the background as well. So I can easily do that with Topaz Clarity. Clarity allows for me to increase or decrease the contrast in different contrast ranges. So micro contrast is going to work on contrast that is originally very close to each other, or tones that are originally very close to each other. So as you take your micro contrast up, you'll start to see that all over the image. You'll start to see some texture contrast pop out. It basically will affect majority of the tones in your image because everything is fairly close to one another, and you'll see a lot of that smaller contrast ranges pop out. And then with low and medium contrast, those are going to be more of your mid-tone ranges. So as you take those up, you'll see that your mid-tones will begin to increase or decrease in contrast depending if you take it to the right or left. But things like the texture contrast of the petals that you really started to bring up with the micro contrast will not continue to increase contrast. So you can work on just your midtones there. And then when you get to your high contrast is going to focus in on your lightest and darkest areas of the image. Usually by the time you get down to your high contrast, at least I find with my contrast adjustments, I tend to have blocked up my shadows a little bit, and taking the high contrast actually to the left will open up those shadow areas and areas that are starting to block up while still giving all these adjustments above the high contrast really bring out that mid-tone and micro contrast, so you can open up those shadow areas and still get a lot of contrast. So here's before, here's after. If you still need to adjust your tone further, like I would like to do, because over here on my left hand side I see a lot of black left over in my greenery that I don't really want. I like the depth that I've achieved very quickly in my dynamics range or dynamics adjustments, but I still think it's a little dark. So I'm just going to take my black level to the right, open up those areas. I think I'm going to take my overall midtones just a touch up to kind of get that glow going in the background, and maybe my white level just a little bit down to counteract any sort of close to clipping that I see. I don't really see any in this image yet, but altogether, here's where we are. Here's before and after. And it's that simple to add some beautiful contrast and pop in a very natural way. And that is what makes Clarity great for flower photography, especially if you're a more naturalist who doesn't necessarily want this really heavy effect, but really want a lot of pop to it, but in a natural way. Clarity is definitely the program for you for that. Then even further than the dynamic clarity adjustments, you have your HSL, which is great for more natural and subtle adjustments as well. So the HSL filter will break down your image into 8 different color ranges, allowing you to change each of those color ranges by saturation, luminosity, or hue. I usually tend to stay in the saturation and luminosity, so I'm just going to hop on into there, and I think I want to just pop out this pink and red interior of my flower, so I'm just going to saturate that part a little bit more with my red. There we go. And my magenta. Okay, I kind of like that. I also want to increase this background glow. It's almost like an orangey glow coming through. And that was from the brick itself that I was shooting down onto. But obviously you can't tell that it's brick. That's what's beautiful about getting a really shallow depth of field, is because you eliminate all those distractions in the background and actually just have really beautiful color pops and shapes. So with that, I want to just increase it just a touch. There we go. Maybe yellow as well, just to get a lot of that glow coming through. That's nice. The green I'd actually like to take down and darken the green just a little bit to minimize my eye going that direction. Okay, and I'm also going to go into my luminosity and take the green luminosity down to darken it versus just desaturate it like I was doing in the saturation adjustment. And I will lighten my red. No, I don't like that. Maybe just a touch. Okay, so all together, here's where we started and here's where we ended up. Let me show you that one more time. That was a little fast. Here's before and after. If I wanted to apply this selectively to just certain areas of my image, for example, if I only like what's happening to my flowers, but I really like this original background much more, I can easily come in and work with my masks in Clarity, use my mask tools, and take out, let's say I want to take out all the detail adjustments for the, or not the detail, I'm sorry, the clarity adjustments for this workflow. Can quickly do that with my masking panel by just inverting my mask, getting my reveal brushes, which is going to be my show brush. I'm just going to do a quick demo here. Go into my normal, or actually I'll even go into my edge aware, which means that it will recognize the different colors that I have my brush on and not go over on the edges. Take my brush size up, hardness down, and I can just paint in on the colors that I want to make sure keep that clarity adjustment. So here it's just the flowers and the pink and these petals right up front. Just making sure not to take my brush and putting it on the green in the background. As long as I keep the crosshairs of my brush on the white of the petals and the pink, it's not going to go in the background. I can quickly just get my clarity adjustments on the petals themselves. So now if I show you the overall clarity, you can see it's only affecting that flower area. I do want it on the entire image, so I'm going to go ahead and take that mask off and press OK. And that's my first program that I highly recommend for taking your flower images to the next level, especially if you're looking for a program that is just going to be an overall good, whether you take it to a more creative look or a very natural pop. This is a great one for you. The next one is Lens Effects, and Lens Effects is something that is a very versatile program. It has so many different uses. Everything, basically, you can think about it as a digital camera bag. It has a ton of different lens effects, filter effects, camera effects, and individual effects that we have added here at the bottom as well, just for you to take advantage of when you're in the Lens Effects program. But you can add all sorts of things, like you can add fog like you would with a fog filter. You can add a graduated neutral density filter, all sorts of different things. But one of my favorite things when it comes to flower photography is using these bouquet effects, where you can come in and add blur in a very natural and realistic way to your background. So if you have one of the things, especially when I'm taking flower images at least, one of the things that distracts my eye and makes my eye wander away from where I am trying to make the viewer's attention go to is all of the different shapes going on in the background. If there's not enough blur, if there's too much detail, if maybe my depth of field wasn't shallow enough, or I wasn't able to get to that depth of field that I really want to, I didn't have the right equipment at the time, I can come in and I can do that manually very quickly here. Now I can do it very selectively using a Bouquet Selective tool, or I can do it very quickly. And today we're going to go through it very quickly, and we're going to just do the simple one, which is called Bouquet Center Focus. And basically you just get a center focal point, and then the rest of the image other than that focal point will become blurry, and you get to set all those settings. So I'm just going to say bokeh center focus, come down here to the lower right and press reset all, open up my bokeh adjustments, and I can choose my effect center. Before I do that, let's take a look at the actual effect itself. I'm going to take the blur amount way up. I'm going to take my focus width and height, though that's about fine, and I'm going to take the transition all the way down so you can really see the effect itself. So now it might be a little difficult to see, but I hope you do. You see that the very center of the image has this circle, and that is our focal point. And now I can press my Effect Center button over here on the right-hand side, go into my image, and choose where I want my Effect Center, which is actually just my focal point. And I'm going to put it right here in the center of these two flowers, and the focal point will go to that direction. Now I can go in and change my focus width and the height to get the correct area that I want in focus. And once I'm at that point, I can come in and change my transition to be a more natural transition between the blurred area and the focal point. And then I can come into my blur amount and choose how much blur I would like to add to that background. I can either go super blurry like we have here, here's before and after, or I can take that blur amount down and get a more natural type of transition in my blur. So here's before and after. Now I actually really like a lot, especially in this image, a lot of these bouquet shapes that are coming through over here on the left hand side, but it's also drawing my eye over here into the left hand side because there's a lot of color and glow. So just blurring it up a touch allows for my focus to go directly to the flower itself, which I find is really necessary in a lot of my images that I come up with. The other cool thing about these bokeh effects is that you have the ability to come in and actually change the lens characteristics. And what that means is the blur characteristics, basically. Whenever you're actually using a physical lens, it's going to have different, when you're using very shallow depths of field, it's going to have different effects than your next lens. Each lens is going to be kind of different. So you can come in and you can choose certain lens characteristics to produce certain types of blur or bokeh shapes. So let's say I wanted to make sure, currently by default I have a 5-blade shutter for this lens characteristic or this blur characteristic. So if, just to give you an idea, if I take this creamy slider all the way down and I take my highlight boost up just a touch, highlight threshold down, and let's go ahead and zoom or look at some of these blur edges. You can see it's kind of a 5-edged blade blur now versus the circle that it seemed to be earlier. But I can change my aperture shape back to a circle, which will change the blur characteristics itself. I can change that creaminess all the way to the right and make the blur much more smooth and less harsh, I guess you can say. And now here's before, here's after. I think it's kind of subjective whether you like this before or after, but we're going to go ahead and move forward with this because I think my eye is going to the right much better than it was before, and I'll say okay. And what I meant to press was apply. What's very cool about lens effects is you can apply a certain filter and then move on to the next filter that you would like to work with. And the last one that I did within lens effects for this particular image was go in and add some color adjustments, and I actually went into the toy camera effect, but because I know that I'm going to use that here in the next workflow, we'll skip over it in this one, but I'll show you the final. That is what I ended up going, and that went a little bit more creative. Oh, that was my clean. Here we go. With the lens effects, there we go. This one a little bit more creative again, less out of the box. So with that color adjustment, I really amped up that creativity, or not just the more effect versus the more natural pop. But you can see that with lens effects and clarity, it's a really great standard program workflow to work with your flower imagery. Now let's talk about, we'll go into this image here. Again, this is the original image. I'm going to skip over quite a bit of this. I'm going to skip over the rotation of the canvases. I was just checking out, I just didn't like this original vertical, and I knew I wanted to go horizontal or square. went horizontal and decided to wait on cropping until I got really into my workflow and figured out what I wanted to do with the image. And as I went through, and again, when I first saw this, I thought I really want to focus in on the light versus anything else within the image. So let's go ahead and I'll skip over the crop part too, and we'll just turn all these off and take this background image, make a copy of the background image. And the first program I used was Lens Effects this time. I skipped over Clarity, and there was a reason for that. I did not want to increase my dynamic contrast at all within this image. I thought that would actually take away from the light. I wanted to kind of open up certain areas, and I can do that within Clarity, but I also knew that Lens Effects I could do that in when I went in with my blur characteristics, because I used a different type of bouquet, and I went more with the selective bouquet, which takes a little bit more effort but can give you more realistic results. So we'll go over that really quickly. And then I took it into black and white effects and then lens effects again to get that overall lighting that you see at the end here. Okay, so let's take that background copy and go filter, topaz, lens effects first. This was a situation where I was in this rose garden at the Arboretum, and I was taking some pictures that just were not very good. The lighting was not very good. I couldn't I was taking a lot of pictures with the lighting coming straight down, and I think again it was about 2:30 or so at that point, and it wasn't turning out very good, and I didn't have anything as far as a reflector to open up my shadow areas. So I just started walking around and looking around, and this was another situation where there were these roses, these climbing vine roses, hanging off of these structures, and I just started kind of trying to put the sun behind those roses to really just get a different type of look. And I got several different types of lighting, some more a little bit soft, and then some like this one more dramatic. And when I saw this, I knew I wanted to use it. I just didn't know which way to go with it. And I really let the creativity kind of just drive the workflow. But I'll show you kind of how I ended up at least. And this is just an example of, even if you're in really bad lighting, you can make the best of it. Really play around with your depth of field and your position of the lens and yourself and your body, and move all around to see what you can really do when you're out there shooting. You might not encounter this type of thing, when you're in the studio, but outdoors I tend to of course, find myself in great situations in horrible bad lighting. So great subjects, not great lighting. Let me go ahead and press reset all just to make sure. And instead of being the bokeh center focus, which again is much easier to do, so if you have just one center point, I totally suggest doing that. But if you want to be more exact about your blur or your bokeh effect, or you want to have you have like several a more complicated subject, using this bouquet selective really gives you a lot of control over that effect. So I'm going to say bouquet selective, and I'm going to say reset all. I'm going to open up my edit depth map. Now you see over here on the right hand side, instead of there just being two modules like there were in the bokeh center focus, there's now 6. So it's much more complicated, but totally worth it if you have the time and really need to use something that's more realistic. I'm going to go over this very quickly. If you want to know more about this creation of this edit depth map, I highly suggest you take a look at our Quick Tip Thursday video on the depth map creation. It is also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/topazlabs. Just search lens effects during that channel and it'll pull up that video, so you can go over that a little bit more thoroughly if you're interested. But basically, in a very, very basic terminology, you have an edit depth map, and the tones that you can use go from 0 to 255, 0 being black, 255 being white. I always say the 0 is the nearest area, which is the black area, and the 255 is the farthest area, which is the white area. So you're basically just creating a depth map prior to going in and adding your blur on the focal plane where you want it. So the first thing you need to do is tell the program, where is everything in this image? Is it close to you? Is it far away? So that's what we're going to do first. And to simplify this, I'm only going to use 3 tones for this particular example. I'm going to use black for what's closest to me, and that's going to be the 2 flowers and maybe this leaf over here. I'm going to use white for what's farthest away, which is going to be the sky, and I'm going to use a mid-tone gray of 128 to color in the rest of the flowers in the background, just so I can still get a nice blur on those, but it's not going to be as blurry as the sky itself. So let's go ahead and press reset all, and I'm going to press reset all after clicking on my 255. That means it'll reset to my white. And so I have a white background. Since the majority of the image is this background of the sky, that's a great place to start off with. And now I'm going to go to my depth value of 0, and that's going to be our black. And I'm going to take my brush size down here and take that up pretty high. I'll take that all the way. And I'm just going to brush on to the areas of the image, the subjects that I need to be closest to me, which are going to be this flower, this leaf. You don't have to be exact when you're creating these edit depth maps. Whenever you make a stroke or a selection, you can just kind of tell the program, okay, it's about here, and it will read what you're trying to do and kind of fill in the rest of the edges to make it exact. So it helps out quite a bit. So let me just make a couple other selections here. And now that I've done these flowers that are up close, now I'm going to go ahead and click on this 128 depth value and choose the rest of the flowers and stems and things like that. Choosing these larger areas first, and it'll just fill out, and then we'll go in and do more selective areas on the small, very small stems. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and zoom on in. One thing, don't worry about as you're working here if you start to see some crazy edges happening and things that are blending wrongly, or I don't know if that's the correct grammar there, but it is okay because you can come in and you can continue to edit it. And because we're making everything super blurry, it doesn't have to be super exact unless you have an area that's black right up against the white. At that point, it does need to be super exact, but at this level, really don't need to worry about it. And we'll go in again and tell the program a little bit better what it should be doing. So I'm just going along the edges of these stems, and that's pretty basic. I'm going a little fast here. I would take my time a little bit and get a little bit better of a selection, but this is okay too. Like I said, it's not essential that it's perfect. Once I have basically what I'd like, I'll take that back off. Okay, now I can go to my white, back to my white tone, which is 255, and just clean up the areas of the background that have filled in that I don't want them to fill in. So I'm just going to go along these areas, and as I make these strokes, it's telling the program, just kidding, don't fill these in automatically like the program just tried to do. Open these areas back up. They're not supposed to actually be filled in. The program is smart. It's it's almost like content aware. It will try to figure it out for you. So if it does something wrong, you just have to quickly let it know, like we're doing here. That's not what I was intending you to do. Good thing is it doesn't really take all that much effort to let the program know what you like. Again, I can sit here and take a little bit more, well, a lot more time if I wanted to, but it's not necessary, number one. Number two, I don't really have the time right now, so we're almost done. This at least will give you the idea of the additional benefits that you have, not only in the selection of the blur itself or the depth map, but also the controls that you have over those different areas when you go through this module versus just the basic one. All right, let me go to my depth map of, or my depth value of 0, which is black, and just fill in the rest of these areas on the roses themselves, the subjects that really do need to be exact, and make sure that everything there is taken care of. It looks pretty good to me, and I'm happy, so I'm going to press focal plane adjustments. And what that's going to do is get me out of that edit depth map mode. Now I'm just going to go to my regular single screen here. And now I can choose my focal plane position. So I can select my focal plane by choosing this button here, selecting the button, and selecting the area of the image that I want in focus. I'm going to choose this big rose over here to the right. And what that does is take my focal plane position to the value that we've set it at, which is that 0 or 1 value. I'm going to take that back down to 0. And then take my background blur and take that all the way up so you can see what happens here. So you can see all of the background area that we have told the program is the background by that depth map has now gone even more blurry, allowing our eyes to go more quickly to the focused areas, which are those 2 roses and this leaf here on the right hand side. I'm going to take that background blur down just a bit, and I can also increase or decrease my depth of field. So if I want my depth of field to be a little bit more long, I can take that to the right. If I want it to be a shorter depth of field, I can take it to the left. And it's going to get more blurry more quickly, basically, between the values if I take my depth of field to the left, which I'm happy there. So now I can go to my lens characteristics and change the lens characteristics like we did within the bokeh center focus. Here, the only thing I'm going to do is take my creamy slider up and get a little bit more of a smooth blur transition. And then I'm going to go into my favorite areas for these selective bokeh effects, and that's the focus area adjustments versus the blur area adjustments. You can come in and individually change those 2 areas to be exactly where you want them to be. So I can, in my focal area, I can sharpen just my focused area. It'll leave my blurred area alone. I can change my sharpen radius and get a little bit more of a sharp area there. So that's great. I can change my brightness and open up those areas, and that's, since my real star of this image is the glow itself, I do want to increase that brightness. And I also want to decrease the contrast and open up the shadows of the flowers themselves and really allow that light to shine through. And again, this isn't affecting the blur area, only the focal area. And now I can also change my saturation. So I might take that a little to the right and give it a little bit more of a pop of color in that glow. And now I can come into my blur area adjustments and individually change those areas as well. So if I want to actually change the brightness and take the brightness down in my blur area, it allows my eye to focus that much more quickly on the focal area versus the blurred area. So I really like taking that brightness down. I can also change the contrast as well. I am going to take some contrast out of the image to kind of take the attention away from the transition of light and dark over here on the left-hand corner. I'm also going to take the saturation down as well, allowing the color of the focal area to really shine through. Now I could add a vignette here in this particular module to even drive our attention even more so, but I'm just not going to do that quite yet because I know my final, I've already played around with the image, and I know my final step is going to be coming back into lens effects and working with the toy camera effect. But prior to doing that, let me show you one of my other very favorite programs to work with in a more creative fashion when it comes to flower photography, and that's black and white effects. So let's hop on into that. Here's before. This is when we took it in, and here's after. This is a little strong on the brightness for the blurred area. For me, I'm going to take that back up just a touch. I'm going to take my contrast up just a little bit in my focal area, and I'm going to say okay. And my thought process of going into black and white effects was I really want to drive attention to the light and form of the flower versus the color. So I thought, hey, black and white effects would be a really good option here. But after taking it into black and white effects, I realized pretty quickly that the color really helped the light stand out. So when I went into black and white effects, I just used a few of the tools that we have in there that we actually have in a couple other of our programs, but there's one specific tool that we don't that I love using when it comes to flower photography, and that's our detail selective brush. So let me go ahead and make a copy of this layer that we just worked on and go into Topaz lens, or I'm sorry, Topaz black and white effects. I'm going to press reset all over here. And this is just a um, the sorry, I lost the word. It's just a grayscale transition to a black and white effect or black and white image. Um, so if I want to bring back the color, which I saw right away that I did, I can do that in two ways. I can come to my finishing touches and I can go into my transparency and I can go to 1, and that's going to give me about 60% of my color back. But what it's actually doing in this transparency area is um, blending the original image back in with the affected image. So if you've worked on all of these other things, such as your conversion tools and some of your creative effects, you're actually blending in the original image. And I don't want to do that. I just want to bring back color. So one area that you can do that in and still keep the rest of the effects is through the local adjustments. Local adjustments are going to include dodging, which is going to lighten certain areas of your image, burning, which will darken certain areas of your image, smooth and detail, and then color. So I'm going to choose the color one. I'm going to take my brush size all the way up. I'm going to take my hardness all the way up as well. My opacity, I'm going to take to about 80.8, and that's about 80% of my color that I'm going to bring back in. And I'm going to take my edge of wear all the way down. And I'm just going to do a full on, let's bring back the entire image color. And this is a trick with black and white effects that allows you to still use the tools in black and white effects, but you can still use it on a color image, and it's kind of a trick we have there. So that's just if you want to work on a color image within a program that has a ton of awesome tools that are specifically only in black and white effects, this is one way of cheating and doing that. So a little trick from us. So now I can come in and use this adjustment type detail brush, which I really want to use for the in focal or in focus flowers. So that detail brush is only in black and white effects, and that's why I'm going this direction. I'm going to say overall strength and take that up just a touch. I'm going to take my brush size down, and this time I'm going to take my edge of wear all the way to 1. And again, as long as I keep the middle of the brush, which has little crosshairs in it, on the color that I want to affect, when this edge of wear is at 1, it means that it will recognize the different edges and only affect the color that the crosshairs are on. I'm going to take this opacity to about 0.5. It's pretty high right now, but that's just so you can really see the difference as I paint it on. So now I'm up here on this right flower first and going along the edges, now going along the leaf, going back into the flower, all the areas that I want to add detail to. There we go. And now I'm going to come over here to this left-hand flower and do the same thing. And it's subtle, but it definitely makes a difference. So let me go ahead and take that overall strength up and add in a little bit more there. If you have areas of your image that, especially in the flower photography, where it didn't get sharp enough, this detail brush, as well as using Topaz Detail, the program itself, are going to be really great tools for you to know about. Okay, so I'm pretty happy there. I'm also just going to do a quick conversion adjustment here in our adaptive exposure. Adaptive exposure is something you can find within Topaz Adjust as well, and is really what we're known for here at Topaz, kind of that topazy look where you balance out the image, you open up your shadow areas, you close your highlights. You're really getting a more balanced image overall, but it starts to go into an almost effect, an HDR effect if you push it. You don't have to push it. You can still just get a really nice little pop, which is really beautiful in some of those lighter areas like we just saw there. I'm just going to take the regions up, open up some of those areas, and take the adaptive exposure down. So very quickly I'm able just to get a little pop. Here's before and after. It's not much, but really brings attention to the light in those petals. Last thing I was kind of playing around with was going into my color sensitivity, because as a black and white program, when it's working with these color ranges, it's more of a luminosity adjustment where you're working with the brightness and darkness of certain colors versus actually coming in and changing the saturation or anything like that. So I can come in and really brighten up just certain color ranges like my reds and yellows to really bring attention to the glowing aspect of the light, and maybe take certain other things like my green down, my cyan and blue down, and get some really cool color luminosity changes quickly within this program as well. Here's before, here's after. The other thing I wanted to do is add a little bit of warmth, and you can also do that within this program. And I chose to do that through these little quick adjustments up here on the right-hand side. We have something like sepia, which you can just add in really quick, which will give a nice little brownish tone. But antique dye really worked for me as well. And if this was full strength on a black and white image, it would be a very strong color. So let's just show you that really quickly. So that antique dye really does give you an antique dye type of toning to your black and white image, but when you've brought back in 80% of the color, it just kind of looks more warm and soft. So again, here's before, here's after, very natural. I'm going to go ahead and open up that transparency and take this down to about 80% because it feels a bit strong, and I'm just blending it back in with the original image. And I'm happy, and I'll press OK. The last thing I want to do really quickly in the next couple of minutes, I know I'm running low or running short on time here. I will stick around and answer the questions that we have coming through and work on one additional workflow if you can stick around. But if you're not able to, I definitely want to fit this last part in because I think it's a lot of fun whenever you're working with a more creative workflow. And that's jumping back into lens effects to get this overall lighting effect. When you're working with different types of light that just might not be perfect, you can really take it to a completely different level by going in and really adding in these more creative lighting effects that you can get within lens effects or some of our other programs as well, but I found that this one really worked well for this particular image. So overall, here's where we are at. Here's our original image. This is after the first round of lens effects, after black and white effects, just to really bring attention to the light. And when I brought it back in here, I thought I really want to make the light that's coming down, or the actual light source over here on the left-hand side, the sun, I really want to warm that up and kind of match the light that's coming through the petals themselves. And I thought, let's just take it into lens effects and see what I can do. There's a particular filter in there that I just love, and it's called Toy Camera Effect. And it takes so many different creative options and kind of blends it together for one effect to get some really unique looks. And the great thing is you can take it out and you can use just some of those looks or just not some other ones. So let's take a look at it. Here's our toy camera. And just to give you an idea of some of the looks, you can see here, you can get all sorts of cool things happening here. And my initial thought was something like the memories or memories or soft and dreamy, just to kind of get a soft and dreamy light. But then when I came in, I saw the awesomeness preset. And I thought, hey, that's pretty awesome. I really like this red warm light, and I like the fact that I can have this background too, but I want to change where this light point, these different areas of glow are located. And my image is also going soft because of certain creative effects that are being added over here on the right hand side. So quickly, just to show you what I did, I went into my toy camera aberrations, which is going to control the vignettes and my camera shake and any grain that's added in, and I took all of that out. So I took my vignette strength and just double clicked on that to make it 0, and it took away the darkening edge of my vignette, which I did not want. Then I took my camera shake to 0 by double clicking on it as well. So now my image is sharp again. I also took that grain amount out because I didn't want to add any other grain. So now all that's really happening is we have two different regions of color that are being added to the image. We have region A and region B. It's placed in different areas of the image, and you can control that placement in the placement adjustments. And then we also have image adjustments being added in, such as brightness and saturation. So quickly, let me open up my placement adjustments, and I'm going to take my transition all the way down so you can see what's happening with these two regions of color. Basically, we have a line of color coming from this left right or this top left side, and it's this red color. And then we have another color, which is this kind of green or blue color that is on either side of this red stripe. So I can come in and I can change my region size, which is what I want to do. I really just want a region coming across this lower left-hand corner, and the rest of the region, and the other region to kind of be covering the rest of the image. So I'm going to just play with my region size and region angle to see if I can get that. And here I'm getting that right now, where I now have a region that's cutting across this lower left area where my light source is coming from, and the rest is this red color. But I kind of want to switch those two regions. So the only thing I need to do that is to go into my region A color casts and take those casts down. Region B color casts, take those color casts down. Now we're back to the original color of the image, and I can add into my region B, which is this lower left area, this red and yellow that I'm really envisioning, this kind of beautiful sunsetty type of light or afternoon light that I'm envisioning here. And then go into my region A and kind of add in just a touch of red and yellow, just not nearly as much, to kind of complement that light. And now go back into my placement adjustments and take that transition way up so it blends nicely from one region to the next. And now I've added in this very kind of pretty creative light that I feel complements this subject quite well. I can also go into my image adjustments and do any last minute image adjustments here. So if I want to take the brightness up or down, I can do that very quickly. Maybe take some contrast levels out. If I want to add saturation or decrease saturation, can do that. Saturation boost is very cool because it will help to increase the saturation of less saturated colors, so you can get some very unique effects with the color saturation as well. And let's see here, shadows I will open back up just a touch. Highlights I will take down just a little bit. And that is how I achieve that light effect on this image. So one more time, here is lens effects round 1, black and white effects, lens effects round 2. So I hope this gives you at least an introduction into more creative processing for your flower photography, taking into consideration that you might not always have the ideal lighting or the ideal composition to start off with, and knowing that you can use Topaz software to still take your imagery to that next level, even when you don't have those ideal situations. When you do, you can really take advantage a lot of a lot of our programs. And again, more basic tools that I suggest for flower photography are going to be things like Clarity, Lens Effects, and Topaz Detail for sure. And then additional things to consider, or programs to consider in your lineup of software: black and white effects, Simplify if you're looking for more of a creative painterly type of image. This is fantastic to work from if your original image doesn't have as much focus as you'd like, but you really love the composition or color. You can really take advantage of our more creative programs and go more painterly or cartoony and still use that base image. Topaz Clean I did show you through here as well, so this is the ending of Clean, where you get that more cartoony vector-like effect. So very cool effects there as well. I hope you're able to join us this Thursday as we start covering some more advanced masking techniques using Topaz Remask. Take care, everyone. Have a great day, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. Congrats again to James and Simon, and we will be getting in touch with you here in the next day with your prizes. Bye, everyone.